Thank you, Chairman. We're now live streaming.
Thank you, Teresa. So we're now on to item 10, which is the draft budget. Obviously, members have the report and will have read it studiously, but just to refresh your memories, I think Phil will be able to give you a brief introduction, ably assisted by Alison.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's agenda item 11, I think, that we're looking at. One of the advantages that the pandemic has given us over the last few months is that more and more people are able to join various meetings that we hold because they're doing it in this particular medium through Zoom. So I can only apologise because having read the minutes of the Cabinet on the 4th of January, I see that virtually everyone who was at Cabinet is here today as well. So this is a little bit of déjà vu for most of you. So what I propose to do is to give you an introduction and then the papers, as you would expect, are quite extensive. Many of you will have already had questions which have been answered. Some will have new questions. And I propose that between us, Alison and I will be able to, I hope, respond to those questions. So without further ado, the report before you, which is the same as the one that was presented to Cabinet, contains a recommendation, and that is that we review the report in preparation for the budget setting in February this year. The draft budget that you have before you is built upon a number of key foundations: plans and programs to deliver an enhanced quality of life for residents and businesses alike, affordability based on grants, reserves and receipts, a strong resistance from this council to incur debt, to provide a sound basis to enable us to build back better and stronger as we come out of the restrictions imposed as a consequence of the pandemic. The details of the draft budget are all within the report that's before you, but I would like to highlight some key headlines. First and foremost, this is a balanced budget, and against the background of events this past year, this is no mean achievement. That we have been able to do so is largely as a consequence of prudent fiscal management over the past decade, a trend that we intend to pursue as we move beyond and out of COVID-19 and the restrictions. This budget protects frontline services from cuts. Indeed, a number of services will be enhanced, such as an improved waste service, the recruitment of new officers focused on things like fly tipping, business support, an essential part of our growth out of COVID, COVID compliance and support, and animal welfare. And most importantly, we are honouring our commitments to our climate change and vulnerability programmes. We have utilised some reserves to underpin the draft budget, but we're proposing that we increase our council tax for a Band D property by £4.95 per annum, resulting in a Brecon Council tax charge for a Band D property equivalent to £1.90 per week. However, as 75% of residents in the district are in bands A to C, their cost will be significantly less. This report and the proposals contained therein rely upon a number of factors, some of which are quantifiable and others that are not at the time the report was drafted. So looking at the report, income, that's fees, charges, non-domestic rates, etc., have been reduced to reflect the impact of the pandemic, and the capital programme has been reduced to ensure that we can deliver in line with available funds, as shown in paragraph 1.4 of the report. The impact of the local government settlement has been incorporated, as noted in paragraph 1.5. NNDR has been accounted for, as shown in paragraph 1.6, but please take note of the potential for appeals in this regard and the potential for change following the business rate report to be published by central government, anticipated in the spring. Assumptions around the fair funding review have been included in paragraph 1.7, and the effect of the new homes bonus allocation ceasing is identified in paragraph 1.8. We have identified and shown the revised efficiency requirements in paragraph 1.9. Fees and charges are proposed in paragraph 1.10. The draft capital spending programme that is itemised in paragraph 1.11, and note that whilst there appears to be a shortfall in funding, this is accounted for through the enhanced waste contract service as identified in paragraph 1.12. Members should, however, note the caveats in paragraph 113 in respect of future capital projects. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that despite all of the challenges with which this council has been faced during 2020 and which will continue into this year, the proposed draft budget before us today has no reliance on legacy new homes bonus funding, which will be contributed to the inclusive growth reserve. It shows no cuts to service delivery. It provides financial support in reserves for projects which lead to growth and investment or savings. It also sets a fair financial position to manage any future changes from the fair funding review, allowing time to put an appropriate programme in place if this is required. I commend this report for your consideration. My team and I will do what we can to address any specific questions that you have. And it goes without saying that without the sterling efforts of all members of council, officers and members alike, it would not have been possible to have produced a balanced budget this year in this fashion, given the background against which all of us have been working. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Phil. So I will move to members. Do members have any comments or questions on the report? Tim.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as was indicated, this is a little bit of a repeat from Cabinet, but a couple of new things sort of have come to the fore. We should have seen the draft of the carbon audit as promised by Cabinet by now, and that would have given us an indication as to whether we have sufficient capital budgeted for the climate emergency that we've declared and the things that we need to do. Certainly it's quite slightly concerning in the budget as it stands that we don't really have much in terms of capital in that direction, and clearly we are going to need some capital expenditure to meet our climate emergency obligations. In terms of the increase, I mean, the fact that we have gone to the absolute maximum, I mean, it's allowed 5% or it's got to be less than 5% or less than £5 in order to not require a referendum, and we have gone to that limit, does kind of imply that we are somewhat underfunded. We've gone to the limit and we're doing what we can. But that said, it's very pleasing to see that we are maintaining our services and we are holding our own, shall we say, during this current crisis. One final thing, back at Cabinet, we did repeatedly hear that Breckland was the cheapest council tax. Let's be crystal clear that if you're making any claims, make sure that you are clear on which ones are the cheapest, because the government figures overall for somebody living in Breckland, the overall council tax that they pay is not the cheapest in Norfolk. That accolade goes to Great Yarmouth. So let's be clear when we are making claims that they are factually accurate.
Thank you, Tim. Just on that last point, I think factually we are the cheapest district council tax in the country. But we're doing our best to try and stop that from being the case by finally trying to bring our funding up to a normal level, albeit constrained by the caps that are put in place by government, or at least that's how I see it. I will let Phil address your other two questions.
Thank you very much. Well, firstly, of course, we are discussing a draft budget. As far as climate change is concerned, we are committed to delivering a programme. This was answered, I believe, at Cabinet as well by my colleague Ian Sherwood. But if there are any details that you'd like to understand in more detail, I'm sure Alison will be able to fill that void for you. as far as being underfunded, I really have to take exception at that. We are delivering a balanced budget against a background which is unprecedented in the last 100 years. You know, we have managed our funds and our staff and our resources in such a way that we are able not only to maintain our core services, we're also enhancing them and providing services which do not fit into the core service proviso. We are doing what we can for our residents and businesses in Breckland. And remember this, at £4.95 per week increase, that's 0.01 pence increase per week for the residents. For £1.90 per week, Breckland District Council, if all you have is have your bins emptied, that's all you're paying for, £1.90 to have your bins emptied. I really do find the suggestion that this council is underfunded and underperforming to be totally unrealistic. And you're quite right, Chairman. As a council, Breckland District Council is the lowest district council rate in the country. And it's certainly the lowest in Norfolk by a country mile, as was pointed out by Councillor Boris at Cabinet. So, Alison, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to add about our climate change.
Thank you. Just to add that when we know the programme of works that fall out of the climate, the carbon audit and the climate programme, that will come forward along with the budget requirement and be approved as one whole at that time. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Phil. Are there any other members who wish to speak? Terry, I thought I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Phil, for the introduction. I appreciate this has gone through sort of various sort of stages, and it's grateful to Phil and others that, and Alison particularly, that have briefed myself as the leader of the Labour group. So I won't comment on the overall budget. I want to focus on one specific aspect, if I may. Whether we like it or not, there has been quite a steady increase in people's overall council tax over the past few years. And there's one particular slide in the paper that jump out for me, which is the one which details how for a Band D in 2016, the total council tax bill was around £1,500. And now for 2021, assuming our increase goes ahead, the police authority and county, it will take it closer to £2,000 per year. So there has been a sort of shift in the emphasis on funding council services by council tax. It's gone up quite significantly overall. Now, for me, I've made the point previously that I regard council tax as a regressive tax. It impacts those on lower incomes to a much greater extent than those on higher incomes. But there are safeguards built in. Particularly for us through the local council tax support scheme or reduction scheme, so that those on low incomes are supported. And obviously this year, Breckland residents that were eligible for that received 100% support with their council tax, not just for the Breckland element, but for the overall element. And I know of several residents that received that, and it was significantly important to them and their sort of household budget this year, which has obviously been increased and stretched because of COVID. Now, I'd certainly hoped that because the pandemic is ongoing and the financial impact is going to continue even more so this year than perhaps last year, I had hoped that that sort of support level would be maintained, and that was certainly an expectation on behalf of me that that would be sort of built into the budget. Now, for whatever reason, that's not actually going to be the case. The support level will go back to 92.5% as I understand it, and I completely understand that's not Breckland's fault. That's to do with the funding calculation and how much the money receives from government. And I sense there's an aspiration that if it was funded, we would take that option, and I think it's important that we recognise that. So I've been having a few conversations with Alison about this, about what we might be able to do, and she might want to comment. with the money that we are getting, some £137,000 from the government, specifically in recognition of people's inability to pay council tax, we can't afford still to help everybody in receipt of the local council tax support scheme. And I asked myself, even if we could, would we? But Alison suggested if we wanted, and the Scrutiny wanted today, we might be minded to recommend some sort of hardship fund, utilising some of that money at least, so that those that are in specific difficulty with paying their council tax, there might be a degree of greater support in recognition of the issues with COVID and reductions in people's income. I'll probably explain that a little bit jumbled up, but Alison can probably explain it a little bit better. But if we wanted, Chairman, I believe there is an option for us to make a recommendation to utilise some of that funding for a specific hardship fund. So I wondered if we might have a minute to explore that option, please.
Thank you, Terry. If we let Alison speak on that, if she wishes to. I'm just having a look. Is Alison here?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, there you are. Sorry, I lost you for a second. So yes, if you could just comment on that, please.
Yes, so we have been given a grant of 137,000, just under, as Terry says. It is possible for us to set some of that aside if members chose to, as a specific hardship fund. Under the regulations, the district council has to bear the full cost of any hardship relief that we grant. So we could set a small pot aside. We could work with the Anglia Revenues Partnership to determine a policy which meets members' requirements, which could be something along the lines, for example, of supporting people who have been impacted recently, who were completely up to date, for example, with payments previously. So the policy can be our choice. So if members would want to, we could support that, maybe using around half of that money that we have been awarded by government. The other half we would need to support the budget for the increase in claimants that we're seeing. So it is something we're able to do if we chose to, and if members wish to support it, we could put something into the final budget to full council in February.
Thank you. In which case, what I would propose as a sort of way forward is, if Scrutiny is minded, and we will debate this shortly, but if Scrutiny is so minded, I would recommend we make a recommendation alongside the budget report, which says something like, we would ask that the cabinet member, in consultation with officers, come up with a form of words to provide an amendment to the budget that has the effect of giving around half of that, as described by Alison, as a hardship fund.
Very happy to support that, Chairman.
That would be great, and then that way we can leave the technical drafting outside of our requirements, just in case there are some bits and pieces that they need to get ticked about. So if we debate that matter, then I've seen David indicate, and I've got Mark as well. So David first.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to unilaterally support Councillor Jermy's proposition. I think this is an issue that's going to get larger as time goes on, unfortunately. And I think having a hardship fund would be of great benefit to those members of our community that do find themselves in such hardship. And I would support that proposition that you've just made, or suggestion, should I say, that you've just made 100%.
Thank you, David. And Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I believe that was a proposition you put to the Commission, and I would like to second that proposition and take it forward to the vote, please.
Thank you. Before we proceed to the vote, I will ask if there are any other members who wish to speak on it. Tim?
Yeah, very briefly. I know we're not just looking at the detail of the words at the moment, but I think we need to be careful putting in there that that recipients of this grant were totally up to date with their council tax in the first place, or at some certain date, because some people have been struggling with this very large expenditure, which is increasing for a long time. I think to exclude people like that may actually be difficult on some people who are trying their best.
Thank you, Tim. So, I mean, that is a relevant point that we should iron out before we make this recommendation. Robert, if you want to speak as well, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarification, is this support fund in respect of total council tax payable or the district council element of it?
I believe it is total, but Phil and Alison can shake vigorously if they disagree. No, they agree. So it is total council tax payable. Any other questions? So I've just been jotting. So I think the wording should be something along the lines of: Scrutiny recommends that the Cabinet member, in consultation with the officers, establish a hardship fund using 50% of the available resources, and introduce this by way of an amendment to the budget. I think we just need to iron out what Scrutiny's view is about individuals who weren't up to date on payments, because as Alison said, the hardship fund at the moment she would envisage would be one that supported individuals who were previously up to date. So Alison, if you want to just comment, and then we can just get that clarified.
So that was an example of what the policy could include. So the policy can be for members to decide. Obviously, the more generous it is, the quicker the pot will run short. But that was just an example I gave. That doesn't have to be the specific wording. So perhaps it's one for the Cabinet member and Councillor Jeremy who proposed it for us to discuss with Anglia Revenue's partnership to come up with the most workable and helpful solution for customers. That
sounds really. Are members content with that as a way forward? So we can keep the wording I've just spouted, which hopefully Teresa was able to jot down, but shake vigorously if you weren't. No, good. And then we can leave it to the discretion of the Cabinet member. We will, of course, have an opportunity to vote on the amendment when it comes to full council, which is where we'll determine the budget anyway. So hopefully, you know, if we're wildly unhappy with what Phil's done, then we can make that clear on the day. So if members are minded to support that wording, we've got a proposal in a second. Could I see all those in favour of adding that recommendation to the report? That has been carried. Thank you very much. Going back to the full report as it is then, are there any further comments members have on the rest of the report? I have David. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Chair. It's a concern, I suppose, coming back to the question of climate change, which is quite on a lot of people's minds at the moment. In my correspondence with Greg Pearson, he indicated that the climate change report of the planned programme would be presented to Council on the 25th of February, which is when we are being asked to approve the final budget, if I'm correct. Would it be possible to, I'll use the term in its broadest sense, if possible, put some pressure on the Cabinet member for climate change that we as Council members actually see that report prior to that date, because trying to assimilate the programme and the budget at the same time, I think is probably going to be quite difficult. And I think people will have comments to make about the final climate change report, and I think that should be done prior to the budget, if that makes sense. I hope it does.
That does make sense. I'll flag that our commitment around climate change will be a multi-year one, and that's why, although obviously it's important in terms of what capital reserves will be put towards that issue, if we don't manage to finalise the situation before this budget, I don't think in the grand scheme of the timelines we're looking at, and it could be up to 2040, I think the date is yet to be determined for when this council will aim to become carbon neutral, but it needs to be no later than 2050. I think if the Cabinet member for climate change requires an extra few weeks to get all the ducks in a row, then I wouldn't begrudge him that given the circumstances. But I note where your point is coming from, and it is of course pertinent. Robert.
Thank you, Chairman. When this was discussed at Cabinet, Alison did point out that there are various capital grant schemes available. So if we can take advantage of those, it doesn't impact the baseline budget.
Thank you, Robert. Phil.
Just to underscore that last point, actually, Chairman, I don't want anyone on this call to think that we're just going to dodge that one and rely on grants. Clearly, grants are a significant and important part of how we might drive our climate change agenda, but we also have a commitment to do what we can as a council as well. But again, one has to review what we can achieve given the situation pertaining to our finances at the moment. We are very good at levering in funds. We've shown that over the last decade or more, and we will continue to do so. But it is a significant part of this council's aspiration to drive the climate change agenda forward. As has been said in this particular context on many occasions, members of the public and businesses alike in Breckland are living with the consequences of climate change. There may well be some naysayers out there. In fact, there has been some correspondence to that effect. But frankly, climate change is here to stay. And we have to do and have a responsibility to do what we can within our budgets and with our available finances, and levering in what other funds are available in order to make life a lot easier for us here in Breckland with our residents and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I haven't seen any further indications from members. So I would ask if someone could propose that we take the report with our additional recommendation and approve that. I've got Mark. Is there a seconder for that? I've got Linda. Could I see all those in favour, please? I have everyone. Any against? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Seeing none. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Alison, for your time today.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
We look forward to seeing the wording of that amendment at full council.
I'll talk to Terry shortly.
Very good. In which case, we will move on to item 12, and I stress 12. It's a bit embarrassing that despite dealing with a multi-million-pound budget, I can't count above 10, but I am there now. So item 12 is the planning enforcement item. Simon Wood is going to present. Have you got some slides, Simon, that you want to talk to?
I do, yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll try and share those.
That'd be excellent.
So hopefully you can see those.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So just very quickly, I apologise that Chris Curtis isn't with us. He had to go out on an urgent call this morning and hasn't been able to make it. I'd also say that given this is a public meeting, it's not possible for me to comment on any individual enforcement cases, but we're happy to pick those up outside the meeting. What I've got on the slides is essentially the national guidance in relation to planning enforcement, so that members of the Commission have an understanding of where we are coming from in terms of the enforcement service and the national policy context in relation to that. This is taken directly from national planning guidance. I'd also stress, as I do in the report, that enforcement is a legal process that has to pass evidential tests if we're going to formal enforcement. So if I kick off, so effectively we have a definition of a breach of planning control, the carrying out of development without required plan permission, or failing to comply with any condition or limitation subject to which plan permission has been granted. You'll see there that we have a definition of development, which effectively is that it's the carrying out of building, engineering, mining, or other operations in, on, over, or under land, or changing the use of that land. As you'll probably guess, there is a mountain of legal case law that relates to this, which we also have to have regard to when coming to a view as to whether there's a breach of planning control and the impact of that breach. The breach of planning control is subject to time limits. So there is a period of immunity. So you have a period of 4 years to take action in relation to a breach of planning control consisting of operational development. So that's engineering or building operations. And it's the same for non-authorized change of use to a single dwelling house. So if you have a building such as a barn that's been converted to a dwelling without planning permission, you have a period of 4 years to pick that up. There is now the ability that if something has been deliberately held, hidden rather, and that there has been a degree of misleading the local authority or others, then you can apply for an order that would allow you to extend that 4-year period. The final immunity period is 10 years for any other breach of control, which relates essentially to changes of use and breaches of condition. So those are the basic options that an enforcement service has. The ability, no formal action, retrospective planning applications, planning contravention notice, stop notice, and enforcement notice. So in terms of no formal action, the advice is that this can often be the quickest and most effective way of achieving a satisfactory and lasting remedy. It may be a breach that's occurred in error, which can be quickly resolved by the owner when pointed out. We're told that we should avoid action when there's a trivial or technical breach of control that has little impact on the immunity of the site or the surrounding area, or that development would be acceptable on its planning merits, and formal action would solely be to regularize the development. Essentially, if a local planning authority comes to a view that the breach of control that has occurred would be acceptable in planning terms if it was an application, then it shouldn't be taking enforcement action against it just to regularize the breach. So there is an ability for applications to be submitted retrospectively. If it's considered that that's the most appropriate way to regularize the situation, a local authority can invite a planning application. A developer or a landowner is perfectly at liberty to submit a planning application if they wish to do so, whether invited or not. The submission of a retrospective planning application does not assume that permission will be granted. It still has to go through the normal process. And if there are other elements of the development that are considered unacceptable, then it is still open to a local planning authority to serve an enforcement notice if it's appropriate to do so. The planning contravention notice. This is a legal document that's used by local planning authorities to get information about ownership, the nature of the use of land, and any elements of the suspected breach of control that are relevant to the formal consideration of it. There is normally a 21-day period for people to respond, and if they fail to respond within that time, then that is an offence, and it is open to take formal legal action if it's appropriate to do so. We can only serve those when it appears that a breach of control may have occurred. The language the National Planning Policy Guidance uses is that it can't be a fishing exercise. Essentially, you have to have cause to serve a planning contravention notice. It is discretionary to do so. We don't have to serve a planning contravention notice before considering whether or not it's expedient to take action. But certainly, if we were going to be taking formal action against a breach of planning control, it makes a lot of sense to serve a planning contravention notice to get the relevant information in terms of land ownership, etc. So a stop notice, as it says, can prohibit any or all of the activities which comprise the alleged breaches of planning control. However, you can only use a stop notice if you're taking enforcement action against a breach of control. You can't go out and stop something just purely because it requires planning permission. It's not possible to do that. There has to be a serious breach of planning control. it also has to be borne in mind that there are cost implications if a stop notice is wrongly served and used inappropriately. Again, enforcement notice, the power to issue an enforcement notice is discretionary. There is a test of expediency. Just because there's a breach of planning control does not mean that a local planning authority is able to take action against it. A formal enforcement notice is the last resort and is where there are serious breaches of planning control that can't be remedied in any other way. We do have the ability to do what is known as under enforcement, whereby you serve an enforcement notice requiring an owner or a developer to carry out certain actions that would make the breach of control acceptable. There is a right of appeal against an enforcement notice. There are about 8 different grounds on which an appeal can be lodged. Most of them are technical grounds on the basis that planning permission should be rather that the immunity period has passed, or that there is no breach of control, or that it's permitted development, or the notice has been wrongly served. There is also grounds of appeal that planning permission should be granted. It's an offence not to comply with an enforcement notice, and if there's no compliance with an enforcement notice, the local planning authority has the ability to go to court. So that is essentially our enforcement process. That just gives a very basic flow chart in relation to the process outlined within the report. So we have an online form, and it is important that everybody, members of the public, etc., all use the online form, because as I said at the outset, this is a legal process, and that allows us to have an audit trail. It allows us to be transparent, and it allows us to be able to ensure that we are dealing with an enforcement complaint properly and efficiently. What I would say is that enforcement complaints are confidential, and that the GDPR regulations apply very stringently to the information that we can give out in the public arena. All complaints are triaged by the manager, who takes a view as to the severity of the breach, whether it is something that could be diverted to another regulatory body. And just as an indication, of the 391 cases we had in the first 11 months of last year, we diverted 27 to another service where it was considered that it would be better able to be dealt with through their regulations. If it's clear that there is no breach, again, we will close the case. If, however, it's considered that there is a case to answer and needs investigation, then that is investigated. And then the manager, in consultation with the case officer and with development management officers, if necessary, takes a view as to whether or not it is expedient to take any further action, and the case is either closed or that further action is taken. That might be the serving of a planning contravention notice. It may be inviting a planning application, or it may be considering more formal action. So that was a brief canter through the policy background to enforcement. Quite happy to share these slides if it would help at all. And as soon as I'm able to, I'll stop sharing the screen. So I've lost it now.
Thank you,
there
Simon.
We go.
If I could kick off with a question, and then I'll allow myself a question and now come to David and the other members. I wanted to ask, in the event that there was a breach of planning and the council decided that it was not expedient for whatever reason to enforce, but interested stakeholders were disappointed with that decision and felt that it should have been enforced, what rights do those stakeholders have vis-a-vis the council?
We have an internal process that requires a decision not to take any formal action, and a decision to take formal action to be signed off by a senior manager within the council itself. I'm not aware that there is any right of third-party appeal essentially against that decision.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. David.
Oops.
No, now you're on mute again. Try one more time.
Is that better? Yes, okay. Thank you, Simon, for your report, which, as the originator of the question to full council a month or so ago, the numbers that you very kindly supplied to me, Simon, have they been circulated to members or not?
In relation to the question you asked at council,
yeah,
councillor, they were in the papers that went to council, I believe. I haven't circulated them, no, but I'm more than happy to circulate them to this committee through Teresa.
I think it would be very helpful because, for example, I mean, Simon made reference to the period up until the 1st of December 2020, because one of my concerns was the workload on the planning office, the enforcement officers. And there were 391, as you said, cases received, but the vast majority of those, 209, were with no breach established. But of course, even if there's no breach established, there's still a certain amount of work that has to be done to get to that point and refer. So I think those numbers that you very kindly supplied for the previous years would give members a better understanding of the volume that particular area has to deal with. I was surprised, to be honest with you, with the large number that were received. And of course, over the last 5 or 6 years that you very kindly supplied that information. I think that would be very helpful if you could circulate that to members along with the slides that you've kindly produced.
Yeah, more than happy to do so. And I think it's worth pointing out that numbers are increasing year on year effectively. And I think 2020 was a strange year for many reasons, but I think one was that people being at home maybe took more notice of their surroundings than they would normally do so.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Are there any other members who wish to ask any questions? Ian? Go ahead, sorry, Ian, I haven't seen anyone.
No, thank you, Chairman. Couple of points. I know, Simon, we've discussed the conditions and enforcement previously. I wanted to just flag more the general in some respects here, which is first off picking up on David's point, whether or not the resources are actually sufficient to deliver the service that we would be liking to see, and whether or not that is an influence, or an influence as part of that is the appetite to actually enforce. Now, the process that you've gone through and taken us through is very helpful, but clearly there is an element of discretion within the range of how a local authority might actually choose to respond. My sense has been that there has been less appetite in Brecon than maybe in other authorities. And if so, then the question is why? Or is it just because, as you said on serving stop notices, there is a risk that if you get it wrong, there's a cost to the council? Well, that occurs on a lot of things. And just because there's a risk you might get it wrong, which one would hope you wouldn't, isn't a clear reason for not necessarily proceeding. It's a reason for going back and checking your systems to make sure the likelihood of getting it wrong is reduced to a practical level. So have we got the resources? Where is our appetite to enforce? And the associated question is going to be, and you've made the reference in the report on the number of conditions attached to applications, making it actually infeasible to monitor them. Are we misleading ourselves with some of the conditions that we're asking for, or planners actually put into permissions, that really actually aren't enforceable, and raising false expectations. So those were the main points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. If I can come back very quickly in terms of resources, as you know, this is an outsourced service to the council, and the resources are set out within the contract. I think at the moment, when we're fully staffed and we are at present, then we do have the resources to deal with the current caseload. I think if we take on additional work such as condition monitoring, and if the cases continue to rise, then it may well be something that we need to revisit with the council in terms of the resources and the size of the service. I think also there's maybe a discussion to be had on the approach to enforcement. The serving of a formal enforcement notice is always the last resort, and it always has to be in cases where negotiation or other means such as planning up regularizing through a planning application has not happened or has not been successful. I wouldn't say there's no appetite to enforce. I think there is a clear need to only enforce where it is expedient to do so and where that can be supported through the development plan policies and other technical aspects of the case. For example, if a breach of development is acceptable broadly in policy terms, but there are highway issues, then we would need the support of the highway authority to enable us to take enforcement action, because they would be the ones sitting in front of an inspector saying why planning permission should be refused and why the development should be enforced against. So there are not just solely issues around the planning service and the council that we need to consider. It's the appetite of other organisations such as, for example, Natural England, Historic England, the lead local flood authority, county highways, to support the council if they're looking to take that formal action. And that sometimes is lacking. And that sort of brings me on to conditions as well, because very often conditions are imposed at the request of third-party consultees, highways, flood authority, etc., etc. And where a condition is breached, it's necessary for the body that asked for the condition to be imposed to support the council if the council wishes to enforce that condition. It's very clear in planning advice through the National Planning Policy Framework and the planning guidance that conditions should only be used to make development acceptable. They shouldn't be imposed because it's felt that it'd be nice to impose them. They have to serve a planning function. And we do get the case where sometimes conditions have historically been put on at the request of members, or have been put on to try and resolve issues that maybe aren't directly related to the planning application. And those, when it happens, can cause us problems. We also have to be sure that we are wording conditions properly to ensure that we have clear timings of when conditions should be complied with, and the exact information and actions that a developer needs to take to get compliance with those conditions. So we're always trying to refine and make sure that is the case. And it's perfectly legitimate for members at planning committee in particular to challenge the validity and the wording of conditions if they feel that the way they're set out might make them unenforceable. I think that's probably all I've got to say in respect of conditions.
Thank you, Simon. David.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I did mean to mention something else to Simon. He may be able to give me an answer. I mean, the Breckland website, if one goes onto the website for planning enforcement, there's a lot of good information about what is a breach of planning, what happens to the complaint, how to make a complaint, and so on and so forth, which is very good. But right at the end, there's something called a planning enforcement register. And if one opens up that register, there are only actually 3 cases listed under the planning enforcement register. And I'm wondering what the purpose of that register is, And perhaps Simon could explain the difference between the number of planning enforcement issues and those actually shown for 2020 on the register. Is it a document that we need to either get rid of or enhance so that people can have a better picture of what's going on as far as planning enforcement is concerned? Thank you.
I think we are legally obliged to maintain an enforcement register, and that should keep a register of all the enforcement notices that are served. I haven't been and had a look at it recently. Maybe I should have done, but I will go and have a look at that, and I'll report back, Councillor.
I thank you for that, Simon. But I'm bearing in mind we've had up until December 393 planning enforcement complaints. I dread to think the work involved in actually putting all of those on the register, but it is either there or it isn't there, if that makes sense.
I think the register is there purely to register when we serve an enforcement notice. We don't have to register every complaint on the enforcement register. So it is purely every enforcement notice that we serve. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Helen. And welcome to the land of the internet.
Yes, thank you. My internet came back on. Fortunately, they mended it a little while ago. Yeah, just one thing that I would just like to state is that there's a real frustration from residents that it is for them to report if conditions are not met on an application after it is built. And there's nobody at Breckland that actually monitors that conditions are adhered to. Is that the case? Thank you.
Yes, we don't have a conditions compliance officer. I think very, very few authorities do these days. I'm old enough to remember when I started in the mid-80s that they were fairly fixed part of the establishment, that they are no longer. And I think we set out in the report the fact that we approve between 1,800 and 2,000 applications a year. And each one has a number of conditions on, and the sheer magnitude of monitoring those conditions is extremely significant. And even if we were to do it on a sample basis, 1 in 10 or 1 in 20, it would still be an extremely onerous task, and we don't have the resources to do that. And I think if that's something that members think is necessary and important, then we probably need to have a discussion about how that is resourced. What we do is we do react to complaints from residents when we do receive them.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any other members wishing to speak on this item? I don't see any, in which case, Simon, thank you very much for your very informative report and your time. And I will bring that item to a close. So, excellent, thank you very much. In which case, we will move on to the next item, which is item 13, outside body feedback. Do any members have any brief updates they want to provide to the committee regarding outside bodies? David.
Thank you, Chair. Just excuse me, just to reiterate a previous comment I made with regards to the Hammond Educational Trust. In the present climate that we're in now, with a lot of students subject to being excluded from school and home learning, that the grants that we are able to provide through that charity for provision of laptops is still there. We have set aside quite a large budget for that. It is although it's based in Swaffham, it is Breckland wide. So if any member is aware of a family and could spread the gospel, and aware of a family that is in difficult circumstances, unable to provide their children with the necessary tools for home learning in the present climate, please do refer them to the Hammond Educational Charity website, where there's an application form that can be completed and sent into the clerk. So far, we have provided somewhere between 20 and 30 laptops. We'd like to do more. So if there is genuine need, we've had some very, very tragic stories from, without mentioning names, of course, on some of the applications from single parents who have 3, maybe 4 children, and the only piece of IT they have in the house is a single phone, which has to be shared in order to access the lessons, etc. at home. So there is a demand there, and I know that the government have pledged to provide a number of laptops around the country, but there is an alternative should indeed there be a need. So please do spread the gospel. The Hammond Educational Charity website, if you Google Hammond Educational Charity, that will come up, and you'll find an application form on there, and have that application completed and sent into our clerk. We have set aside a small subcommittee to look at all of those applications so that we don't delay a result. So please do that, and I think we are still able to help out families in the district. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Linda.
Thank you, Chairman. I absolutely applaud what David and his charities, etc., are doing. And most of us are doing the same thing through the different charities we're all involved with. The issue at the moment is supply and demand. We were talking to the head teacher of Thomas Bullock Primary at Shipton, and whilst they now have funds to supply every child with a piece of kit, it's actually getting hold of it. So there's quite a long waiting list. So they've been refurbishing old tablets and Kindle Fire things and all the rest of it to make do, but there is a supply and demand issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any other members who want to bring outside body reports to the attention of the committee? I am seeing none. Just muted myself. Excellent. Well done. Moving on to the next item, which is the work plan. Item 14. So members have seen the attached work programme. Are there any comments or amendments they would like to make? Tim?
Just a query as to when our next meeting is, because the public website has that listed as the 9th of February, and there is an entry on that page. You can click on it with all the details, but the agenda says 4th of March, and there's nothing in the work programme for the 9th of February. So could you have a bit of clarity, please?
Tim, very perspicacious of you. There are plans to have another meeting of audit for a specific item. Teresa, before I put my foot in it, could you just say what I'm allowed to say at this stage, so that I don't say anything untoward?
Of course, Chairman. So as members are aware, the Head of Paid Service is working on a strategic review of the shared partnership that will be coming to through the committee process, and the first report will be for the 9th of February for members to consider. Thank you.
So there you have it, Tim. So that's the additional meeting. There won't be any other agenda items on that. And then our work programme will resolve as normal in the subsequent meetings. I'll let you come back first if you have any further comments, and then I'll go to Terry, and then I'll go to Ian.
Just a minor point, Chairman. I'm always keen to educate myself. So could you just repeat that word you used, please?
Perspicacious.
I shall look it up.
Yes, it means something like green, perhaps. You'll have no idea. I probably used it completely incorrectly. Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 things. One, at the October meeting, we discussed and rejected part of the recommended constitutional change for non-key officer decisions. At council, it was agreed, I think, that this would be going back to governance audit for consideration. Is there any opportunity for us to add anything extra other than the minutes, obviously, of the meeting of October, to go to governance and audit?
Before I answer that question, I'll let Sarah Suggett just briefly comment, as it was her item, in case she has any views she wants to expound before I say anything further.
No, thank you, Chair. No, you have beat me to it. We've had a bit of a tricky week last week, so I haven't had a chance to catch up as yet with Mark Stinson about this. So yeah, so no, if there is anything, if you'd like to bring it forward, then I'll do it. You know, we can do our best to address any concerns anybody has. But yeah, failing that, I will have a catch up with Mark and get back to you if that's okay, Councillor Martin.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it to Sarah to update us. I mean, I think our views were made fairly clear in the October meeting. I'm not aware that the amendment being discussed by Governance and Audit is materially different to the one that we considered at that meeting. So unless something radically changes, I would expect that it will be handled by Governance and Audit, and that they are aware through the minutes of our meeting when we discussed it what the views of Scrutiny were. But I'll defer to the cabinet member and her discussions with Mark in case that changes.
Thank you.
Any other members? Oh, sorry, Ian.
Sorry, there was the second point, Chairman. It's on the work programme in Linda's name, which I fully support. We had the horrendous time over Christmas in various parts of the district. It's not restricted just to Shibden and Yaxham and Matishall. But we did have some pretty poor service from major infrastructure providers. So to be able to bring them forward and actually convert or convey the council's concern at the way that they've performed in responding to these crises would be good. There is a second point that then goes with that is it's one thing to improve in the short term the responses, and part of my distraction earlier when you reminded me I was supposed to be voting, Chairman, was one of the particular problems which has kicked off again today, and trying to get Anglian Water and Flagship to respond. We've had some positive reactions previously out of them, but it's actually affecting them on the ground, which is the key. Otherwise, residents are not properly served. So there's the first bit, which is how to improve their existing service. The second is what needs to be done in the medium term to actually make their service more robust, and that services aren't actually breaking down and failing clients. And then obviously there's the third one, which is for the future. You know, the services are buckling under the existing number of residents and houses. We've got some significant development already permitted. I know the bulk of the 14,000 that's being talked about is in the two strategic urban extensions, but you know the villages are seeing significant increases. My own one is seeing 50% increase, and all the sewage stations were overwhelmed at this last lot of bad weather. So it's sorting out or trying to identify and hold account what the service providers are doing at the moment. How can they improve their service? How can we work with them to improve things in the medium term and to take it into account for our planning purposes, for the local plan and for the future? So that work programme item is the starting point really for raising a series of issues which we could, if we chose as a council or as a commission, take forward in more detail. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ian. And on that item, I don't know how members feel, but that looks substantial to me, and could well benefit from a task and finish group, in my view. If members are minded, then I would ask perhaps if we look at perhaps establishing a task and finish group at the next meeting, so that item can be carried forward in parallel, rather than waiting and having a report and then establishing a task and finish group. Would members be happy with that? I'm seeing thumbs up, so that's fine. Fabian and then Ian. Oh, sorry, Fabian, were you just saying yes, or were you, did you want to speak? Oh, you were, okay. Ian, did you want to speak, or were you, okay, good, fine. Everyone agreed, that's wonderful. So I don't know, Teresa, could you add that as a reminder to us in the next agenda, but one, obviously not the 9th of February one, but the March one. Good. I don't see. Oh, Hilary, you have a comment.
Yes, sir, Chairman. Thank you very much. Bearing in mind on the last problems that occurred over the Christmas break and afterwards, the only person the one instance that could get anything alive and get him going was our MP. Is there any place for him to come to the overview and scrutiny when we're doing this update, to take on board what he hears from Anglian Water? I know UK Network Power have done very well in Shipton, but it is ongoing over the whole area, as has been spoken this morning. So would it be in his interest to just know the seriousness of it and the impact that more housing, etc., is going to bring forward? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So in answer to your question, Hilary, George Freeman MP is entitled to attend any of our public meetings, of course, and when the Task and Finish group is established, its chairman may well choose to invite George to participate in a more active role in the actual committee meeting if that chairman is so minded. So I think you've got absolute flexibility, of course, according to what Mr. Freeman's availability is as well. Linda.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to inform people that Councillor Martin and I have already met with George Freeman via Zoom, obviously, and other key stakeholders, and he is very, very keen to be very involved in anything to do with utility provision. And it's not just water and gas and electricity, but telephone, broadband, whatever, especially looking forward to the future. So he's already on board through an informal meeting we've had with him. Thank you.
Good. In which case, when we create the Task and Finish group, I've seen you, Gordon. When we create the Task and Finish group, then it will be up to the chairman how they bring about that collaboration. Gordon, you wanted to make a quick comment?
Yes, just a quick comment, and not seeking to jump the gun on my cabinet colleagues, but I'm obviously, of course, aware of what went on right across the district on Christmas Eve and following. When all members are elected, we are offered, not everybody accepts it, briefings on how we should act as councillors in an emergency. And since the Christmas thing, I have been talking with officers about making available to all members exactly what we should do if there's an emergency in our ward. I'm trying to get copies of the LGA booklet, but it's actually out of print, so we're seeing what we can do about that. But I think some of the things that went wrong in some parts of the district were because people attempted to report things in the incorrect place, and because it was Christmas, and I mean, that's a reason, not an excuse, because it was Christmas, they perhaps weren't picked up as quickly as they otherwise would have been. And also, some of the complaints about power outages and flooding and so on were very late coming through to our emergency line. So I've looked into it all. I have discussed it with senior officers, and I've given I will be talking to cabinet members about exactly what we can do, but we are already getting a reminder for all members about what we as members should and can do when an emergency of any type occurs. So I just wanted to say that. I hadn't come prepared to say it, but it is there and you will be hearing in the next several days.
Thank you, Gordon. Mike.
Touching on what Gordon was actually turning around, it was something which has sort of crossed my mind several times, that several of us have fairly extensive wards, etc. Now, if we have an emergency arising in one, can we legally now, under the COVID regulations, visit that to ascertain the full extent of it?
I'm going to be a bit harsh here, but I know our meetings last a while, and sometimes it's because we become slightly diverted. So can I ask, Mike, if you could take that offline with Gordon and the officers, only because I want to end the meeting and this is only about the work programme at this stage, if you'll forgive me. So are there any other members who have comments on the work programme? Seeing none, I think that is our last item, although my screen keeps disappearing. So we note that the date of the next meeting is not, in fact, of course, the 4th of March, as Tim has already pointed out. It is the 9th of February. So I look forward to seeing everyone then for that single item agenda, and then we will be back on track in March. So seeing no other quick indications, I bid everyone a good afternoon, and we will see you